So I'm going to talk about what we're doing at Piscinas Ranch. And I just want you guys to keep in mind how different that environment is. But so I'd like for you guys to think about the principles behind what we're doing as I'm going over this stuff. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for taking these principles and using them in this type of ecosystem. Actually, I would, in studying with Alan Savory, he always reminded me there's only one ecosystem. We have multiple environments, but only one ecosystem. And it's the reductionist thinking that we always go to, thinking, okay, we have the ecosystem of the East, the ecosystem of the West, the Arctic ecosystem. We have one ecosystem on the planet, and it is only, that's all we have, is just one ecosystem. So anyway, I'm going to be talking a lot about especially our grazing program at Piscinas Ranch and what we're doing and why we are doing it and what we are learning from it. And one of the things I also like to say is that there are no experts in regenerative agriculture. We're all in this together. And so it's so great that there's a group of people who are basically in the same environment, pretty much similar environment anyway. And one of your best resources is each other here. And so it's really good that you guys are bringing up conversations. And the thing that we don't have enough of in agriculture in general is imagination and creativity. And so it's really a creative endeavor. And the more that we can kind of stand back and think outside the box and think about what are we really trying to do and how do we work with this incredible force that is nature to do things that are easier and more fun. So I'm not really tech-oriented, and when I was doing this presentation, PowerPoint offered to do a slide suitable for this title. And I thought, God, this is so ridiculous, I'm going to leave it. But I think that person is really thinking about what is overgrazing as they're walking down that stair. So I left it. Basically, overgrazing happens in a couple ways. It can happen from staying too long in the same place, and it can also happen from returning too quickly. Overgrazing can also occur in the spring as soon as a plant is leafing out and sending up its first shoot. And what is happening is that overgrazing is basically not so much what you see above ground, but it's what's happening below ground. So overgrazing technically means that you are grazing off of sacrificial root of the plant. So in other words, when the plant is growing and has a nice long stem up there, when you remove the majority of that, you're taking away its ability to feed itself. Because remember, plants are light eaters. And if you all have not seen or read that book, I recommend it highly. Just came out pretty recently. It's called Light Eaters, and I think that is on our resource list. So when you take off basically that, when you take off the leaf matter of a plant, and I'm in my mind I'm thinking of a grass plant because that's easy to visualize, and it's just got some stems, some leaves coming up. When you take that down basically to the ground, and most grazing animals are severe grazers, and they want to do that, especially if they're in a large herd and they're kind of competing. They're going to eat as much as they can. So when you do that, then the plant is going to have to sacrifice some root to recover. If that plant has not created the leaf matter to start photosynthesizing at full capacity again, then it gets grazed again, that is when overgrazing really occurs, because the plant has not had an opportunity to recover. And so again, there's those basically three different types of overgrazing that occurs. Staying too long in one place, coming back too quick, or grazing early growth in the spring. And overgrazing can occur from basically any type of grazing animal. Insects could overgraze a plant by not allowing it to recover. So there's a lot of organisms that browse or graze plants. This is, again, some high-level artwork that I've done. And this is looking down on a vineyard from above. And it may look like sheep turds, but in my mind, those are brown sheep. So I have two different versions of grazing that are occurring here. And one is what is kind of more conventional grazing, where you would turn a bunch of animals out into, and this is a vineyard looking up above, but it could be just a regular pasture, or it could be a crop field. And so we put the animals in here, and we leave them for a long period of time. Oftentimes it's called season-long grazing. So you'll leave them in there for the entire summer or for the entire fall. And there's low numbers, low density, but a long time. And so what's happening there is that they are overgrazing for a long period of time. And this is actually the most common way that we have grazed in this country for years, until Alan Savory came here and made us all realize that we were not grazing properly, that this was the most common way, especially, I'll say this, especially in the West. I'm not so familiar with what was going on back east here, but in some ways it'd be a little bit easier to do this back east because of the rainfall that you guys have. Overgrazing is much more apparent in brittle environments and environments with low rainfall, because it's easier for a plant to regrow if it has water. If it's a dry condition, then it's going to be harder. On this side is same size, same number of brown sheep or turds, whatever you want to see them as. But what's happening is they are staying in a small group. Imagine, again, this is mimicking what would happen, what is still happening in places like Africa, and what is and probably like up in the tundra and stuff, where you have predators associated with large grazing animals. And they are staying in tight groups, but they move frequently. So in this particular scenario, you might leave them in here until they've grazed down about halfway. And then you would move them back up here. And you can see in this particular scenario, they started here, and you can see by the color of the grass here that it's dark green. So they have had a chance to recover. And now when you go back and graze there, they have a full root system, and they're able to be grazed again without overgrazing them. So if you graze something all the way down to the ground, that is not overgrazing. If you graze it all the way to the ground, and then the shoots that come back, which are living off of sacrificial root, that is overgrazing. So the first thing that I talked about, like maybe what's happening here, that's severe grazing. So it's not until the plant has to use its root reserves to grow because it doesn't have enough plant material to photosynthesize. When I was first getting into managing vineyards in California, the very first vineyard I put in and managed was in Arizona. And it was completely surrounded by national forest. I had to put in a 13-wire electric fence to keep out all the problem bears in Arizona were dropped off in that canyon. So if they're raiding a campground, they got taken out to Whitetail Canyon. And in addition to that, we had mountain lion, we had jaguar. That's where first jaguars were photographed in the country. We had coatimundis, we had ring-tailed cats. It's the most biodiverse spot in the lower 48. And so it was just a crazy high amount of diversity. And that's where I first got the idea of running sheep in a vineyard, but it wasn't until I got out to California that I started doing that. This is a vineyard that I used to drive by, and they were grazing baby doll sheep in here. And the way they were grazing the baby doll sheep is they were doing like that first slide I showed, they were doing the thing where they put them all in one paddock and left them there. And this is getting toward the end of the season. You can't tell from this photograph, but it's actually fairly steep. And right next to it, the cover crop was this high. So this was planned overgrazing. And the first time I gave a presentation at EcoFarm, which is kind of a big ecological farming conference in California, I had this slide in my presentation because I said, even if somebody is there that knows this site, they wouldn't be able to tell. And the woman who had the contract grazing service that grazed this was sitting right in front. And so I gave my whole blurb on that, and afterwards she came up to me and she said, "That was me, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, thanks for not calling me out." And she said, "What do I do?" I said, "Take a class in holistic management and learn how to graze, because you are doing a disservice when you do this. And you could be doing a really great service if you understood what you're doing." And to her credit, she did. This is a soil core samples that were done in North Dakota by the NRCS. And I believe this is still on YouTube, this test that they did. And the reason they did this test is because they had 3 different management practices occurring within 200 feet of each other on the same soil type. And what we had there was a well-managed grassland. And that basically, in this case, meant that they were using holistic planned grazing. And then they had season-long grazing, which you guys are now familiar with what that is. And then they had converted cropland. So this is all 200 feet from the same area, same soil type, just different management practices. And so this is the why we want animals in our croplands. So the interesting thing about this is a little fact that the majority of what is called regenerative agriculture occurring in this country uses herbicides. And that's no-till corn and soybeans primarily in the Midwest, and they're using herbicides. This was, so it says converted cropland, it was either the well-managed grassland or the continuous season long. I've never been able to find out what it was. This is in the first year of no-till. So I suspect that herbicides were used on this. And what we're looking at here is what has happened to the soil structure. And remember, soil is full of all kinds of living organisms in addition to the roots of plants. So here we can see that we have this great pore space in here. So there's great exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the soil because of the open porosity of the soil. Here, it's still pretty good, but not as good as it could be. And here it's almost completely lost in 1 year. And without tillage. So you can see how important it is to maintain those root structures. But the fascinating thing is that after this, they went and did a water infiltration test. Does anybody here not know what a water infiltration test is? Okay, that's great. So they did a water infiltration test at each of these sites, and they were testing to see how long it would take an inch of water to go into each of these different soil types. Let's start with this one. Any guesses?
I didn't.
1 inch of water. How long did it take for that to get absorbed into that soil? It was 33 minutes. They commonly can get 4-inch rainfalls in this area. So that means that the majority of that water would get washed off. So not only have you destroyed the soil structure, you've destroyed the water cycle, which has also destroyed your nutrient cycle. So you've basically annihilated the soil. You're going to do no-till crops on here, and you're going to probably use fertilizer. The conventional fertilizer will further degrade that. So you've just basically created a perpetual dead zone. What about the season long? Any guesses?
20 minutes. 15. 10.
It was 11 minutes. Any guesses on this?
3.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
So unless you were trying to create a parking lot, it doesn't really matter what kind of agriculture you're doing, because if we have high rainfall, we want to get that deep down into the soil and not running off. We want to get it cycling down. And if we're in a very brittle environment, we want to make sure that every drop comes in and is captured and stays in there. So this is why grazing animals of any kind are so important in our ecosystem. And remember, just about every ecosystem evolved with animals. There's only a few places, I think it's 70 or 80% of all land aside from the polar areas evolved with grazing animals. The big areas that didn't evolve with large herding animals are the tropics. And if you think about it, the tropics are constantly cycling nutrients because they have such a high level of relative humidity that they are actually like the rumen of an animal all the time. So, and I know there's a few people in here that work in policy. The implications of this are huge. Right now, what is happening in the Great Plains is at a massive scale. And we are addressing that by using artificial fertilizers and just perpetuating the problem. And we're turning in what was one of the most fertile places in the world into a parking lot. And we're subsidizing that too. So I'm going to go into the story of the vineyard at Piscinus Ranch. And this is the vineyard site right here. And I was, the owner of the ranch, Sally Calhoun, said, okay, you can put the vineyard anywhere on the ranch that you want as long as it had been farmed previously. So this is 7,600 acres, and everything that could have been farmed on that ranch had been at some point. So it was pretty open, but I chose this spot for a number of reasons. And one of them was, actually I want to see if anybody can guess. There's a big indicator on this as to why I chose this particular site.
Trees or no trees?
Okay, you got it there. And one of the reasons is because, so this is when we had 1,000 acres of vineyards on the ranch between 65 and 95, this was one of the sites that they used. But most of it was actually down low along the river, very prone to frost. There's 3 huge frost ponds left on the ranch. There's no water in them now. But so I selected this because I looked around at the ecosystem with which I was working in. And this is, again, is one of the tenets of holistic management. Know the ecosystem that you're working with. And so I said, okay, I want to plant a perennial crop. Where are the perennials growing? And you can see this here, and this is a north-facing slope. Because we're very dry and we can be hot at times, the perennials tend to only grow, except for some of the grasses, on the north-facing slopes. And we had one native perennial on this site, which is a bush called coyote bush. And that was the only perennial on the site. And again, we did a botanical survey on this before I actually selected this site, and there was 11 species growing here with one perennial. So I selected this because it's mostly north-facing, and it is has a good slope, so it would reduce the potential for frost. And and this was actually fairly close to water too. So we do irrigate this. We did a light application of compost, and that is the only significant application of compost that we've done on the site. Was before we. So we cleared the land, we leveled out the squirrel holes, which should have been a good indicator that I was going to have an issue with squirrels. And then we did this light application of compost. So this is in the probably late summer. It's really, I mean, I grew up in a place that had summer rains, but it's coming here, it just reminded me that some places get rain in the summer, and how nice that is. So we planted the vineyard in 2017. And so this is probably 2014. So this is that same site. And at the time, we were leasing out the ranch to a cattle rancher who was a longtime practitioner of holistic management. And so we would go out there and do a forage assessment and determine how many animals we could have on there for an acre, per acre, per day. And so the first year, we got 7 animal days per acre. Again, all we've done is we've put on an application, we've cleared the land, we put on an application of compost. And this was just from the natural rainfall. We got 7 animal days per acre. The next year, we planted a cover crop. So this was the first year we planted a cover crop on the vineyard site and got about the same amount of rainfall, and we got 70 animal days per acre. So that was a 10-fold increase in productivity. And I think two things happened. One is that compost needed basically a year to assimilate into the soil and kind of activate it. And so on year 2 is we see the effect in the cover crop and in the amount of forage that we have on there. So I want to mention the economics of all this too. We are leasing land to a cattle producer, and we've increased our carrying capacity 10-fold, and so we're already making money, and we've not planted a single vine. And so this again is this thinking about how we are. Holistic management is all about making money from a productive ecosystem. And so what we're doing is we're restoring health to the ecosystem and increasing the profitability of it. So we're making money as we're establishing the vines. And I think this is where so because it was going so great, we said, let's take it to the next step and imitate how the natural ecosystem would work. And we brought in 50,000 bison and some Native Americans to herd them. Okay, that's a joke, you guys. We did not really do that.
You know, we're in Washington, we don't know what's a joke anymore.
But my point is, we're mimicking how nature functions. And that it kind of looks like the site a bit. And apparently bison did make it into Northern California, but I doubt that they made it into our area. And I just flying over the Great Plains here on, what was it, Saturday, looking down and just trying to imagine that area covered in bison and the productivity on there and the nutrient cycling and the diversity. It's just hard to fathom. And so this is the vineyard a couple of years ago. I think this was actually 2 years ago. We brought in 1,200 sheep to graze during the summer. And that was just for a couple days. You can see we don't have much in there, but the thing that the sheep do for us is they do all the suckering, they do the shoot tipping, they cycle all of the plants. So basically, for the most part, we've eliminated any mowing, we don't do any disking, we don't do any cultivation, we don't have to use tractors well, really the only thing we use tractors for, it's easier to say what we use them for, we use them to spray and to harvest. And this is the Watson trellis system. And I've heard a couple of people here ask me if I know Fritz Westover. Fritz gave me my first public speaking gig, and he's a good friend. And he also introduced me to the Watson system accidentally. And I told him I'd seen it, and then I thought, I think this might work for what I'm trying to do. He said, you're all on your own. I know everybody who's using the Watson. Nobody is organic, and nobody is grazing sheep under it. The ground is always covered, so we're not getting the heating of the ground, and then we're getting the shading from the canopy. It's a great place to work in. And we're getting probably 20 at least 20 degrees air temperature up to 50 degrees ground temperature difference. This is another photo of the summer grazing. And this is so much more fun than being on a tractor. I got to tell you guys, bringing these sheep in. So what we did, instead of sitting on a tractor for hours and hours, is we bring these guys in. They do their grazing, and while they're doing that, we had a little party up in the middle of the vineyard, and drank beers and wine, and just listened to the sheep grazing. And then, the next day we moved them out. So this was a fast summer graze, and we can graze because we have this huge flock. We have the ability to bring in, if we wanted to just bring in the ram group, maybe 50 sheep in there to graze, we can do that, and I think I have a photo of that. Or we can bring the whole flock in, and so it's a great opportunity. And again, this somehow got mixed up, but people asked about urine, and so this is a really great reason also to have the sheep in the vineyard during the growing season, and that is because of the magic of pee. And the thing about urine is that's where most of the nutrients are. We all talk about compost and manure. Pee is where it's at. That's where all the fertility is. It's in a readily available form. It's liquid. And so getting that in the vines during the growing season is critical to what we're doing. And that I learned that from doing the early trials of having sheep in there. And what we are seeing, and I'll go ahead and bring this up now, is that when we are grazing the vineyard during the summertime, and we've been able, because we control, I don't know if you guys saw, but we're using 2 hot wires to control the sheep. So we don't use the net fencing like this. We have some net fencing, and we occasionally use that. But in general, we're just using 2 hot wires. And because of that, when the early years of the vineyard, before everything was up high, we had some vines that were up high and some that weren't. We could actually run the wires in any direction. And remember, because we've raised everything up, all of a sudden you're not confined by rows for any of the activities, for walking through there, anything. And so neither are the sheep, and we can set up a fence, and if this is a vine row, we could exclude a few vines and then from grazing and then bring some back in later on. So we can weave the fencing around to make a paddock. In doing that, we decided to do a trial and wanted to see what the effect was of doing that on the bricks, the sap bricks of the vines. And what we found is that when the vines have access to the sheep, that the bricks can be up to 5 points higher. We've had our bricks up to 22 points, which was higher than the winemaker wanted the grapes. Anybody here familiar with John Kempf? The work he is doing? Okay. Actually, he's on his podcast interview, he's been talking to people who are working in this realm. Basically, if you get the bricks, the sap bricks of a plant up to 14 or 15, you're immune to most sucking and chewing insects. And what that means is that they can't handle the high sugars. And because a lot of those are looking for the plants that are not doing so well. And so what we are doing is we're getting our bricks up so that we don't have problems. And so far that has proven to be true. So if pee is number 1, then saliva is number 2. So drooling on vines turns out to be a good thing too. And we've known this. In fact, I think I have this in the recommended reading, a book by André Voisin, who is a French scientist. And he was visiting a research station in the east somewhere, and he was looking at a specific grass that everybody said, okay, this is the best grass for forage. And he went to one research station, and they said, yep, we did this trial, and we found out this was the best grass for forage. And but the problem is it got hit by leafhoppers and taken out. And so we can't actually use it. We don't recommend it to farmers, even though it is the most productive grass and the best grass for forage. He went to another research station. This is way before the internet. they said, okay, yeah, we're trialing this grass, and it is we agree, it's the best grass for forage, and that is why we're recommending it to everybody. And he said, well, what about the leafhoppers? And he said, oh, you went to that other trial down the road. And he said, yeah. He said, they are mowing that. We are grazing this. Mowing it didn't allow that plant, or reduced its ability to protect itself from leafhoppers, whereas grazing allowed that. So we're now seeing that in a lot of things. We're also seeing that a plant that is grazed recovers quicker than one that is mowed. So a lawnmower cannot imitate a sheep. This is just a shot. This is just a group of maybe 25 rams or so that are grazing in the vineyard during the summer. And again, with these guys, we're going to be moving them more often because we're just getting a better graze by having them tighter. With the large flock, it's nice because you can get uniformity throughout the whole section quickly. With these, it's more labor because we're moving them more often. But sometimes we do this just as a favor to the livestock crew because they don't have a place to put the rams, and they bring all the sheep to us in a big flock occasionally. So it's a reciprocity. And so we've brought in economics on this. This is an example. So I was managing a small biodynamic vineyard in the Alexander Valley of California. This was around 2010. And actually, I guess I've been managing it for a couple of years. And I asked the owner if I could do a trial because I wanted to run sheep in there during the summer, during the growing season. And this was my idea of how to do this. This is just a fiberglass rod that's been cut to 18 inches, and that's just a trellis part there that holds it in place. And I just put that right below the fruiting zone, electrified it, and I put that in January because I wanted the sheep trained to that so that they would have touched that and realized that they don't want to touch that again. Electric fence is a psychological barrier. It's not a physical barrier. It's a very small wire. But once they get shocked by that, then it's like magical. They don't understand how that's happening, and so they have a zone of fear around that. In my experience, there's only one animal that you can't train to an electric fence, and that is a young human boy. They just gotta pee on it. Anyway, so this worked very well. And I had a great control site so this was Cabernet Sauvignon, and on the far side over there, this was a 60 acres, and this was a half acre, and so I was able to compare all of this to conventional management. So you can see that this is taken the same day. I just looked one way and looked the other way and took a picture, and you can see actually in the background you can see this and. So this is this is, again, actually this was closer to a 1/4 acre. And I want to talk about options for sheep because you don't have to own sheep to do this because, we own sheep briefly to do this. But there's a lot of opportunities for smaller vineyards to get animals in a place. But I just want to, so I never had to sucker in here. I never had to shoot tip in here. Even though this is a VSP, when the shoots came down, they would get those. And all of this work in this vineyard was done by tractor, so they were disking this. All of this work was done by hand, so none of that was necessary. At the end of the year, the winemaker working with me on this was a guy named George Vieira, who taught winemaking at Napa College. And this is in 2011, by the way, these numbers. And so this is all the benefits that we had from that. And one of the big ones is right here. First year. So I think that, and actually, in fairness, I attribute part of that to I think that a lot of vines in California are overwatered. And so I think the vines next door were being overwatered. But still, this was compared to when I was grazing it, just during the dormant season. And this is compared to the conventional side. And then, so we had this great reduction in water use and great increase in yield. And according to George, it was the highest quality vintage from that vineyard that he ever did. And we put up a couple bottles and we just said, okay, let's try this in a few years, because what if it tastes like sheep pea? And so we'll do it blind and see what happens. And when we did that, he's like, dang, this is one of the best wines I made.
How long were the sheep in that area?
So they were actually in there from January through June. But again, I was moving them. So I was moving them periodically. But, and I wasn't doing it at the level that we do it now. But we still had great results from that. And so you could probably almost double those numbers of annual cost savings now. And after this, a guy from Bonterra asked me to come out, and we went over it. And I told him $500 per acre. He did a quick calculation and said it would be $1,000 per acre savings for us. So this is just a list of and I have sound grazing reduces or eliminates in vineyard practices. And so again, being able to have them in there throughout the year just, magnifies all of these benefits. And the thing that I added recently is the very bottom in red there. And because we're so tech-oriented now, and people are always coming up with gizmos and saying this is the latest, greatest thing, and I'm like, you guys, it can't even touch what we're doing right now with just managing sheep in a vineyard like this. This is the first commercial vineyard to adopt that offset system. This is in Insay, Victoria, Australia. And this is Insay Vineyard. They have a little YouTube channel where they're showing this. I'm not sure if anybody else has done this. They're using a offset system that was made by Gallagher. And the cost of it was like $4 for each one. And I told them, I said, I can do a fiberglass sucker rod for 19 cents. I said, you guys have to, it's a great thing. They didn't even know what to do with it. But so they sold it to the producer at their cost. And he went, and he was not organic, but he already had sheep, and he went overnight from having to use herbicides to never having to spray again. And I want to show a couple other examples of trellis systems that might work for this. This is what I initially thought I was going to use, but this is more suitable to dry ground. This is called the DOV system, dried on the vine. This is used for raisins in the Central Valley of California. And you can see this is a cordon system. What they're doing is they're just alternating rows every year. And so it's a complete shaded system, and the fruit is just hanging down off of here. These are fairly expensive because the infrastructure is pretty expensive on these. And so it probably makes sense if you can do these in large sections, like hundreds of acres. But it is an example of an overhead system. If anybody's ever been to Spain, Portugal, Italy, you still see overhead systems being used. When Marta and Christina from Porto Protocol came to visit our vineyard, they started crying, and I said, "What's wrong with it?" They said, "It's reminding us of when we were kids." And in the name of modernizing, we went to VSP systems, and we lost these glorious overhead trellis systems that were all over the country. So here's Jerry Watson in his vineyard outside of Houston, Texas, and he was a retired petroleum engineer. And so my mom is actually lives in San Antonio, Texas. So when Fritz Westover said, "Okay, here's the names of the people that I think are doing the best job with the Watson system," and this is in South Texas. This is humid, hot areas. They're just dealing with a lot of disease pressure, and so he developed this specifically to deal with that, to reduce the level of disease pressure, and you can see that he's not organic either. He's using herbicides here. But anyway, this is, after I looked at a few of these things, I said, okay, I know it's going to work for sheep grazing, and I think it will work very well in our environment too. And this is one of the reasons why I think this is so great, is you have so much control over your canopy. So you can control spacing of your shoots, the amount of sunlight and air that flows through those, and just based on your spur positioning. And so there's a lot of control on this. You're getting partial shade. You can control how much shade you have on that. And then when you're if you have this going north-south and are dealing with potential sunburn on one side, you can either allow that if you need sun exposure, or you can just allow your shoots to come down low and shade that. And so you can basically have as much or as little canopy denseness as you want, and that's just a function of your spur spacing. So I think it's a really ingenious trellis system, and it's also dramatically cooling your vineyard. And so that is, especially in hot places, I think that's contributing towards fruit quality. If you were, I should bring a photograph of this, but this is the first planting, and we did change the ends on these where we have a cable coming off of this coming down here. We have this one here, but really we just need one up here, because once we started getting a little weight on these bent in, and they did not have that crossbar initially, and so we had to put that crossbar in there. But on the other side, using a different trellis company, they had the cables on here, and we're not having any issues with that. So this is a slide from New Zealand, and when Elaine and I went there a couple of years ago to present at the New Zealand Organic Biodynamic Wine Growers Conference, and one of the women who worked with me was working down at this vineyard, and so she introduced us to these folks. It's what is the name of that one? Greystone? Yeah. Greystone. And they said, yeah, we're converting our VSP system to a tall trellis. So, and so basically, it's almost just like taking your VSP, except you're dividing it and dropping things down one side, alternating sides. So you have twice the number of spurs as you would have on a regular VSP, but you're just dividing them. And you're dividing them on a single cordon. And it's very simple. It's easy to prune. It's easy to work. It's really easy to harvest. It's actually really fun to harvest. And we've joked about, because you kind of have this partial canopy, and you can only see the person a little bit on the other side. We found that when we have a person harvesting on either side, we do this by hand, but all of the machine harvesters that are built on the west coast of California can harvest this system. And we just wanted to see if that was possible, because we knew people would be asking about that. But we do harvest by hand. Because we have 17 varieties, most of our harvests are pretty small. We're not having to harvest a bunch of stuff at the same time. But when you're going through there and harvesting, you can just barely see the person on the other side. And we found that people get to talking, and like at the end of the row, if they had a good conversation, they continue. And if they didn't, then they switch. So we're thinking of charging people and having a dating service. Because you don't have to look somebody in the eye, you just have good conversations. You get a sense of what their personality is and whether they're a good picker or not. So this is one of the first overhead systems I found in California. This guy had been working on this for years. And this is in Occidental, California. And he's growing Merlot, and he started at a VSP, and he just went from system to system. But his wine was really exceptional. And as we were walking around in this, I said, it's amazing all of the stuff that you seeded in here. And he said, I didn't plant a single thing in this vineyard. This has all come up on its own. And it was a lot of perennial grasses, which are pretty hard to establish in California. And he hadn't planted any of it. But I think just that partial shade, and in this case, it was pretty much full shade, was creating conditions that were favorable to a cool season grass to grow in the summer in California. And again, part of this is just to kind of get your creativity flowing in what might be possible. And that's the reason why I've gone around to visit so many different people and said, how can we do this? How can we do this better? How can we do this easier? How can we do this less in a more economically viable way? And how can it change our management so that it's more beneficial? And then again, this is just looking at the benefits of that. I haven't talked much about the wine, but I will mention this now. And we did bring a Verdejo that was grown in the vineyard. We don't make wine at the ranch, but we do work with 9 different winemakers right now. We have a pretty diverse group. They're mainly pretty small, mainly women, very diverse. We have the only Native American woman winemaker in the country, I think. And she was sent to vitinology school by her tribe. And so we're working with a diverse group of people. They're all pretty small, and they all really care about how their fruit is grown. And that's part of their marketing strategy. That is and we work really closely with them because they're going out and telling the story to the people that buy the wines. And so we're doing it a bit, but it's mainly to people in the industry. They're going out to the consumers. And recently we had a guy come out from New York City who had a wine shop. Actually, I think he moved his wine shop into the Hudson. And he said, I had to come out here and see you guys because the favorite wines that I'm selling from the shop, I realized all were coming from the same vineyard. And so he wanted to come out and see what we were doing. And so that was a pretty nice compliment. I wanted to quickly mention options for bringing sheep into the vineyard. When I was doing that initial trial, we ran 3 or 4 sheep there during the growing season. And what I would do, we did not own sheep. We did not have a place to keep sheep, but I would go to the sale barn and buy, or I would go to a person that was selling sheep and just buy a handful of sheep, run them in there for the season, and then I had the option of either selling them to somebody else or taking them back to the sale barn or putting them in the freezer, which is actually the option that we always did, was to put them in the freezer. But there are, especially if you're at a smaller scale, there are possibilities of just looking for sheep producers in your area, goose producers if you want to try that route, and even finding somebody who has land but is not doing anything with it, and where you could potentially run some sheep there as well. The other thing is just partnering up with people in your neighborhood so that you can do a collective thing. And don't limit yourself to just sheep. As I had mentioned, geese are probably a great possibility. Turkeys, I think, would be great. Try it at a small scale at first. And if you are spraying, be very careful of that and look into what your options are there.